Welcome to today's video. I'm Richard Chapo. I'm an attorney down in San Diego, and I've been representing online businesses for about the past 20 years. Today, we're taking a look at a subject that most people starting a business should consider, but few do, and that is simply, is my online business idea legal? Might sound like a strange question at first, but it's important to understand that a lot of the laws that have been enacted in the U.S. were enacted before this internet thingy came around. And so some of them don't apply well. So today we're going to talk about some of those concepts at least and how they might apply to your online business, as well as criminal statutes and civil statutes that deal directly with the online environment. For the purpose of this video, we are also going to group criminal and civil actions under just the general guideline legal, although we'll talk about them separately. But we don't want to get too confusing here as we move along. So what are we going to focus on? We're going to focus on criminal laws. We're going to focus on civil laws, rules and regulations, and then also on the splinter net, which is a relatively new concept that is becoming more and more applicable to the web every year, and we're starting to see real tangible examples of how it's going to work, and it's something that you probably need to know about if you're going to be planning for the future. So let's start with criminal laws. Criminal laws, well, let's talk about something very basic, which I'm assuming you're going to know, but let's just make sure. If you're contemplating something that is a crime in the real world, it's also going to be a crime online. If you're doing something like selling credit cards in the real world, well, moving online is not going to suddenly make it legal. I'm always a little shocked at what some people will do online and the records they leave. But keep that in mind. It's very important because if anything, doing it online is even more risky because you're leaving a record in almost all cases. So keep that in mind. The dark web. The dark web is a glamorous, fascinating, interesting area. If your business model is focused on the dark web, maybe you're going to provide services or products or things of that sort, and you're going to skirt some laws in doing so, just keep in mind that the dark web is pretty heavily monitored these days by legal authorities. So if you use that in router or the Tor search engine, these kinds of things, well, it's pretty well known that the FBI and other government agencies, control many of the exit nodes on those systems. And so the anonymity that you were promised or that you hear about and see in movies and whatnot doesn't really exist. So if it would be a crime in the real world or in the public internet, moving to the dark web is not going to give you a lot of relief. If you get the attention of civil authorities, they're going to follow you there. In most cases, they become much more sophisticated than they were, and you're taking a real risk if you go in that direction. Now let's talk about probably the biggest online crime situation that most people focus on when we talk about the subject, and that's hacking. So what is hacking? Well, hacking is just the invasion of another person's or company or government's computer system without their consent. And so if we're talking about going in and, violating a system to place malware or something of that sort, that is a form of hacking. If you watch the TV show Mr. Robot, you can see them doing different hacks all the time, and many of those are actually fairly legitimate hacks. And while hacking maybe sounds interesting, glamorous, and what have you, it's important to understand that it is a crime and that it has severe penalties. So in the United States, if you were to get caught hacking, you would be prosecuted under something called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And if you were found guilty, the ramifications would be you would be guilty of a felony, which has major implications on your future life, and you could face up to 20 years in prison. Yes, 20. You could literally kill somebody and get a shorter sentence. On top of that, you're looking at a $250,000 fine, although that's probably less of an issue if you're going to be spending 20 years in jail. So the ramifications of violating that law are serious. Very, very serious. So before you get excited about hacking or you buy a course on how to hack, make sure you understand what's involved in there. Now, just as importantly, if the business idea you have is to launch products or services that enable people to hack or could be used for that purpose, So we're talking about keyword monitoring or anything of that sort. You need to talk to a criminal attorney to make sure that you are not potentially violating the law, or that you cannot be dragged in on a theory known as criminal conspiracy or something of that sort. The law online basically is expanded enough to say that if I promote a tool for a criminal purpose and somebody uses it for that criminal purpose, I got a big problem. So that's an area that probably more people might potentially fall into. So you want to be very careful with that. So the second area we're going to look at is civil regulations and rules and breaches. There are laws out there that were created that don't necessarily have criminal remedies associated with them. Instead, they're civil. So when we're talking civil, we're talking monetary fines, potentially damages, and often restraining orders or court orders that prohibit you from taking some certain action or doing something. So let's look at an example. Apps. Apps are very popular. One of the strategies with apps is you create an app, and then within it, you product placement, affiliate links, upsells, things of that sort, and that's how you monetize the app. Well, one of the audiences that loves apps are kids. So let's say that you create an app that targets kids aged, 8 to 12. Okay, and you slap that app on iTunes, and it becomes popular, and let's say 10,000 people join. Well, if we follow your target audience, the audience you were shooting for, a large percentage of those 10,000 people are going to be kids under the age of 13. And now you have a problem because there's a law in the United States called the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, better known as COPPA. And it says that if you're going to collect personal information online from children under 13, you can only do so if you first get verified parental consent. And if you do not, you can be fined, or the damage claim at least can be up to $40,000 per violation. That means per kid. So if we have 10,000 people using our app and 9,000 of them are kids under the age of 13, and you've collected information from them because you're giving them a login or whatever it may be, you can do the math. 9,000 times 40,000 is a huge number. Now, in reality, that number would be much less because there would probably be a settlement. But even then, as part of the settlement, they would also, they being the FTC, would also tack on typically what's called a 20-period audit. What that means is for 20 years, the next 20 years, you would have to submit a report to them each year, basically summarizing your business practice and what have you. And they would have the right to come in and audit your business, look at your practices, look at your finances, and all those kinds of things. If that sounds like a nightmare, it's because it is. It's a horror show. I mean, like you would not believe. So you do not want to go down that road. Very, very bad. So if all that sounds horrible enough, let's talk about a variation of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act that may well give you the shivers. The European Union enacted a new privacy law, which we'll talk about in a little bit, called the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, went into effect in May of 2018. And the GDPR contains Article 8. Article 8 is very similar to the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, except it sets the age for the child at under 16, not under 13. And then each member state of the EU can pick their own age. So you have some countries pick under 13, some pick under 14, some pick under 15, some pick under 16. But think that through. Under 16, that's a very high age. How many 15-year-olds do you think are on Facebook right now? And how does Facebook possibly figure out who those people are? It's an incredible burden, to say the least. And the penalties associated with the GDPR are also very extreme. So civil penalties are an area that you want to be paying attention to. Civil rules and regulations that you must comply with for nearly every business that really pops up in the marketing area. If you're working with influencers or third parties that you're giving free swag to or money to market your products, for example, influencers on Instagram, you must disclose that relationship. And if you don't, you can get the same penalties, the same $40,000 damage claim against you by the FTC. And if they prove that in court or in front of an administrative judge, you're looking at significant fines. The FTC actually gave influencers and online businesses a couple of years warning on this one. And then this past fall in 2018, they issued their first case where they went after the boxer Mayweather and DJ Khaled, who were promoting some product and didn't disclose it. And they both settled their cases and ended up paying fines and what have you, I believe. So the FTC is now active in regard to this. So make sure you follow those disclosure rules. In fact, you should consult with an attorney or go to the FTC site and look up. They have quite a few FAQ pages on these topics that can be very helpful. You can obviously contact me and I'll be happy to walk through them with you. But of course, I would charge you, whereas the FTC website is free. But just make sure that you understand that. The second area we're going to look at with civil is private party rules. Well, you're probably thinking private parties can't pass laws. You're absolutely correct. However, they can form contracts. And you must comply with those contracts if you're going to participate in whatever it is that they're offering. So that's sufficiently vague to confuse anybody. So let's look at an example. Amazon. Amazon has a very successful affiliate program. If you want to be an affiliate, you must agree to their terms and conditions associated with the affiliate program. One of the requirements in those terms and conditions is that you publish a statement on your website that says, I, comma, fill in your name, comma, am an Amazon affiliate, and the products that you see sold on this website will generate commission for me or something. I don't know what the statement says. You can go read through their terms and conditions to find it. If you do not publish that on your site, you are in violation of those terms and conditions, and they can terminate you. Honestly, they can terminate you anyways, but it's one of those things. You want to make sure that you comply so that you give them fewer reasons to look at you and terminate you. Particularly if you start building an entire business model, around that affiliate program participation. And you're seeing more and more companies add these kinds of statements to their platforms because they're trying to protect themselves from, the affiliate who just goes hog wild and starts spamming 100 million people, and those kinds of things. To that end, with Amazon and other sites, you also have to look at their email rules. A lot of affiliate programs will not allow you to include affiliate links in email marketing. And again, the reason is they don't want to be dragged into lawsuits. The email laws in the United States are fairly benign, but in Canada and the EU and other places, they're rather nasty. And so you're seeing these companies, include these prohibitions in their rules and regulations. So you need to look at those and comply with them. Now, a bigger lesson that's kind of off topic with these things is as soon as you can develop your own products and services, you should. Because you run the risk that somebody at Instagram or wherever, or Amazon's having a bad day and they just terminate you arbitrarily, which has happened. The AdSense system, the Google AdSense system, there were people terminated from that for no reason that anybody can understand. And Google didn't, for a long period of time, didn't give any reason. And one day you were good, and the next day you were done. And if you were making 10 grand a month, 15 grand a month off of your AdSense sites, well, that could be a really ugly day. And so if you develop your own products, your own services, whatever it is, even sell your own ads, at that point, you're in a much stronger position because you have control over your revenue stream. Another company does not. So that's an aside, but keep it in mind. So the third topic we're going to talk about is the splinternet. And splinternet was a concept that was developed, maybe 10 years ago. And what it is basically people were trying to look towards the future. What was the future internet going to look like? We had the Arab Spring and all these things, and people were joining hands and kumbayaing, and unicorns were dancing across the screen. And a lot of people thought, well, that's probably not really what the internet's going to look like in the future. And it turns out they were right. So the splinternet is basically the idea that the internet is going to be divided up into it. Well, it will still be worldwide from a practical standpoint, particularly commercially. It's not going to be. You're going to have economic regions, and businesses will choose to do business, within specific regions. The reason I'm raising is we're seeing it now. We're seeing this breakdown now. So I'm going to give you an example. Again, we'll go back to Europe. Their privacy regulation went into effect this past May in 2018, the General Data Protection Regulation. Well, it basically says you need a legal basis to collect information from people. And then there's 90 articles discussing how that happens, penalties, and everything else. It's very complicated. And complying with it costs a good bit of money, particularly the bigger you get. Some companies are spending up to $2 million, $3 million trying to comply with it. I fear to think what a company like Facebook spent. So the problem becomes at that point, do you want to comply with that regulation from a financial perspective, meaning, is it worth going through the cost and all the aggravation and the upkeep and the maintenance each and every year versus the amount of money that you're generating from that region? And the answer for a lot of smaller businesses, particularly startups, is going to be no. If you're in Berlin right now and you try to pull up the Los Angeles Times website, you can't see it. A page comes up, says, "I'm sorry, we don't serve content to your jurisdiction." And the reason for that is the way that the LA Times and most newspaper sites monetize their businesses makes it very difficult for them to comply with the GDPR. Well, the same system, same idea applies to you. You need to look at your traffic. You need to always be watching your traffic and thinking, well, do we need to comply with this? Because if we have no, no people or no sales or no, revenue really of any significance being generated from Europe, well, do you want to spend 15 grand a year, 10 grand a year, whatever it is, going through the compliance process when you're making $500? And the answer for most logical people is going to be no. Now the change, the only alternative to that would be if you had a potential future projection, where you think that something's going to blow up for you in Europe. But even then, is it not better to maybe form a separate company in Europe, like you see the big boys doing, that's subject to those regulations and just deals with those, and it isolates the rest of the company from those regulations. So there are all these kinds of different topics that you need to start thinking about. So if you're launching and you're starting, the splinter net's probably not a huge issue, but you need to be thinking about these things. You need to be thinking about, where's our target audience? Because the days of being lazy and saying the world is my audience they're over. And frankly, you're lying to yourself if you think that's true. Because if you think you're getting a sale out of Kazakhstan, I really don't think that's going to happen. The world is not your audience. You're looking at North America, you're looking at Europe, Asia, depending on the products that you're offering, maybe South America. It just kind of depends. India, it depends on the specific business practices that you have. But it's time to stop being lazy. It's time to get focused and realize, okay, we need to go above and beyond. And start really, looking at these issues and making sure that we have them in order. So those are the kind of the ramifications. Splinternet is going to become even more of an issue as we move forward. You're already seeing it developing in other areas. You're seeing countermeasures in California. Something called the GDPR Lite has been passed, which is a privacy law that sort of mirrors the GDPR in Europe, but it's not nearly as deadly as the European version. And that's going to spawn most likely a national law in the U.S. on privacy. So obviously you're going to want to know what that says. My expectation is, based on the lobbying system we have here, it will be the most fascinating law that has absolutely no guts to it. So it'll have all kinds of rules and regulations and maybe like no monetary fines, because obviously Google and Facebook and, Twitter and all these kinds of companies are going to be front and center, with checks in hand for the politicians. Boy, that sounds cynical. But regardless, if you're starting up, you need to be thinking about these things now. The days of just slapping up a website and, merrily walking around in circles and, expecting to make $1 billion a year, unfortunately, probably over. So anyways, so that's it for today. So as part of your startup process, is my online business idea legal, specifically around the edges? Is there something unique about what you're doing that might cross a line? It's probably a good time to sit down with an attorney and spend an hour with them, to have them look at it and give you some insight as to whether you're doing anything that's going to cause you problems. Because you really don't want to be 3 to 5 years down the line, having spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and money, and find out that the approach that you're taking is not going to work. That would be a real disaster. And nobody's going to be looking good coming out of that. So that's it for today's video. This is one in a series that we'll be putting together. You should see a playlist off to the right covering topics related to launching an online business. Feel free to take a look at those videos, or keep an eye out for a new one by subscribing. We'll be issuing videos on various legal topics pretty much from here on out, at least 2 or 3 a week. So thank you for watching, and have yourself a great day.